Today, I am joined by Jean-Francois Gariepy. He is a biologist, an author, and the host of JFG Tonight, and the author of The Revolutionary Phenotype, a very recent book. Welcome, Jean-Francois.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you on. You're a very controversial figure in many directions. Just a cursory Google search will reveal all sorts of terrible attributes that you're linked to. But today I want to talk to you in your capacity as author and biologist, and as someone who might shed a bit of light on a lot of technological developments that I think a lot of people on the right and even on the more fringy dissident right don't really know how to parse, don't really know how to understand, and don't really know, it's to take as, maybe utopian technologies that will, solve the fertility crisis, or, something that is relevant in our civilizational conflict with China. There's all sorts of angles on this, but yeah, you've written on this, and especially about the implications of CRISPR. So, there's many places to start, but what's kind of the core thesis of your book, and what are the implications of the revolutionary phenotype?
So the core thesis of my book is that life forms pass through stages and that they evolve normally. And normal evolution had been pretty well documented by biologists. That's how you get from a bacteria to an elephant, basically a set of reinforcements through natural selection that apply to features that help the organism live. And they lead to organisms that are increasingly functional and increasingly complex most of the time, a lot of the time, not always. But regular evolution was pretty known. But what the theory of phenotypic revolutions address is those special moments in evolution where things revert, where things don't go the normal way, they go in an opposite direction, where there is a kind of, I don't know if we could call it de-evolution, but from the perspective of the life form that initiates those events, it's definitely an act of de-evolution. It's a reversal of the normal set of pressures that lead to an organism to become complex and stable. Phenotypic revolutions are extremely unstable events where the genes get changed. And my claim is that if we start engaging in CRISPR, we are going to start a phenotypic revolution, and that the last time such an event happened is about 4 billion years ago. And when you engage in a phenotypic revolution, the outcome of it is a destruction of your genes as a replicator and their conversion into a tool, into a phenotype that is into a part of your body, and the genes eventually become something else. I say, if we start playing with CRISPR, we're going to let some artificial intelligence decide for us, and de facto, the replicator will not be our DNA anymore. It will be some artificial intelligence, some set of signals in a computer, and some hard drive determining what humanity looks like. And by doing so, we will abandon all of the pressures that led us in the first place to become human.
Mm. Yeah, there's kind of a school of thought on the kind of more fringy right that this is essentially just another step in human evolution. That you have kind of the external brain, the logic of the machine taking over and continuing. And some people just say you kind of have to relax into it because it's inevitable. Kind of the accelerationist view that this is just the next thing that's going to take us over. Why shouldn't we celebrate this? Why is this not natural? What is the mechanism here that is going to destroy us as we know ourselves?
So it's not inevitable in the sense that we can choose the evolutionary direction that we take. We chose at some point to start putting roofs over our heads, and this has led to a certain evolution. We don't have as much hair as the other primates because we live covered in clothes and covered with roofs and walls. We decided this, and we could have taken another direction, and we still would have as much hair as a chimpanzee. So we can change evolutionary directions according to what we desire. Now the question becomes, should we desire to be in a phenotypic revolution? The mechanism, I believe, is an undesirable one. because of what it means for everything that exists and that is currently human. Now, you could say, okay, the life form that will develop from a phenotypic revolution, this kind of computer-human hybrid society, that for that life form, everything would be fine. It would live, it would go on, it would compete. But for us, it wouldn't be fine. And I think there is a moral, deontological issue with taking something that is free, something that is competitive and creative like humanity currently is, and shunting it down, turning off its emotional triggers, turning off its capacity for sexual selection, turning off its motivation and its desire for grandeur and for an ego and for just realizing things in the world. The reason we want to realize things in the world in the world is basically that we have a desire to conquer the world to please the other sex, both in the sense of males and females in their own ways. If we engage in a phenotypic revolution, we will lose all of it and everything that's attached to sexual selection. Because in a phenotypic revolution, some kind of central entity starts determining what your genes will be. And as such, you are not subject to the normal Darwinian processes that led us to acquire basically everything that we have that's different from bacteria. If we hadn't had sexual selection, we wouldn't have mushrooms, plants, and all animals. So when you think about the features that we will abandon when we abandon sexual selection, we're talking about the entirety of our cognitive capacity, our emotions, and everything that makes us creatures with will. Because in a phenotypic revolution, the entity that gets eventually farmed by a central entity or central AI becomes subordinated progressively through thousands of years by the central entity, because the central entity is the one according to which natural selection goes on. And so I don't think that if humans were to understand the consequences of a phenotypic revolution, I don't think they would choose it willfully. We're talking about the destruction of human civilization as it stands and its replacement with a class of kind of slaves that will eventually be selected as slaves to the AI, because it's inevitable through evolution that you become a slave to whatever central entity feeds your genes. The way I compare it is we are about to turn humanity in the same way, through the same process that happened to bees and ants when they started trusting queens, central queens that will determine the entire genetic composition of a colony. Once you do this, you are not an individual ant or an individual queen anymore. You are an individual bee anymore. You are trusting your queen to determine the passage to the next generation. And when you look at what happened to bees and ants, they were turned into sterile workers. There is only one entity that reproduces, it's the queen, and the rest of the colony is enslaved to the interest of the queen. Now, what will happen to humanity is that our queen will be some computer, some network of scientists that will determine what we become. And these scientists and these computers, whatever they are and whatever form they take, they will not have our best interest at heart. And we will no more evolve to become better versions of ourselves. We will evolve to become better tools for this thing that will take over us.
Yes, I mean this kind of describes an end state, but I feel like um, some of the ingredients are already there, even before CRISPR, even before. I mean, the idea of being guided away from sexual selection by a central memeplex, and this essentially choosing sterility because of of an idea or of many ideas that you've been implanted with throughout your life, and the depolarization of the sexes. This has been in the works for a very long time. I mean, sex is not very sexy anymore, and a lot of people don't really know how to put their finger on why this is the case. Overstimulation with everything all the time. I mean, there's a lot of things that flow into this. So could we say that maybe the phenotypic revolution is kind of already rolling, and CRISPR is just kind of the crowning achievement of this thing that's going in that direction.
Absolutely. We should keep in mind that CRISPR is the point of no return. When we start doing it, we get rewarded evolutionarily and we can't go back. But definitely, you can look basically at the last 200 years of human history and interpret it as the first step within the phenotypic revolution. And what's so scary about humanity is how eager they seem and how just perfect they seem to be manipulated into a phenotypic revolution. First, the first step of a phenotypic revolution is understanding that you have genes. And we've done that for the last 200 years. We've been digging into the details, understanding evolution through Charles Darwin, looking at ourselves, finding what are the genes inside of us. Turns out it's DNA. So all of this sets the stage for the first step, which is you need to understand that you have genes. You need to understand that they're competing according to regular evolution. The only step that we're missing really is you need to be tempted to play with them. You need to be tempted to change them. And that's what we're currently doing. We may have done it already in China. A scientist who went on his own and decided to do it without permission on two young girls because he wanted to provide them protection against HIV infection from their father. Whether that's true or not, and whether he accomplished it and whether that will work is not so important. What's important is there's too much temptation and there's too little knowledge. There's too few people who understand the full consequences of a phenotypic revolution and who are in position to say, we don't want to apply those evolutionary forces onto humanity. I think that there's basically no one except myself who fully realize everything that we will lose. And it is pretty much anything that you could like as human beings, anything that you could define as human will go away. And we will be turned into tools for something else.
Yeah, I think one of the major arguments for continuing research in the CRISPR direction is exactly this. You know, that there are dark forces in the second and third world and other kind of imperial states that are already doing this, and if we don't do it, they'll do it, and then they'll have, I don't know, 7-foot super soldiers and just decimate everything. And this is obviously the extreme jokey version, but I mean, if these wheels are put in motion. What type of implementation of force at what level would it require to stop research, or I don't know exactly, maybe not stopping research is not the solution, but to essentially say, okay, we outlaw CRISPR on a global level?
Well, I think that there are different scenarios. One scenario is coexistence in separate areas. So if a continent decides to go CRISPR, another decides not to, there could be mutual respect that would maintain a DNA-based life existence. But as we've seen in our own civilization and through the very sets of competitive forces that exist between nations, eventually populations that overpopulate a place of the globe end up dripping out of it and populating the other places. So it might be very hard because even if you were to keep two separate places where DNA-based existence and CRISPR-based existence can go on, eventually the people would be respected for having rights in both places. Citizens could immigrate and they could seed new types of revolutionary phenotypes in whatever area they haven't gone yet. So I'm worried that coexistence is basically impossible. I'm also worried that this competition argument that you mentioned, this kind of arms race of if we don't do it first, someone else will do it. Arms race arguments are irrational, and humanity may very well pursue the arguments that you've mentioned there. But it would be irrational to do so. And what I hope is that we can convince people that an arms race is invalid if it leads to mutual self-destruction. That if you are talking about a game like the chicken game, where two people will collide together and potentially kill each other, you have no interest in playing that game. It's a bad game to engage with. It's irrational to want to play that game unless you think you can get away with it. What I say is with the phenotypic revolution, none of the people alive today will leave biological descent. So we all have a common genetic interest in not doing it. And what we need is to tell the population and convince the people that it's not just about me. It's not about you, Alex. It's not about this politician or this nation or that nation. Everyone will be threatened by a revolutionary phenotype. And whatever it is that you think you are leaving as descent will eventually be turned into something else by this computer. So you might as well argue that when you let a computer mess with your genes and the genes of your children, because that's where the computer will come in. They will not change your genes as you are alive. They will simply change your genes as you reproduce. When you do that, your baby is not your baby, and it's not part of your line of descent. That baby is a product of the computer, and it will eventually serve the interest of the computer in its actions and its evolution.
Yes, I mean, is there a chance that because this is kind of the case with AI conversations around AI safety and everything. They always say, okay, AI is very close. It's 20 years in the future always, and AGI is going to come, and the singularity is going to wipe us out, and all this. Is there a chance that CRISPR could be a disaster technology, that it doesn't actually deliver on the promises, that it wouldn't lead to that problem because it can't actually deliver on its promise? I don't know much about CRISPR. Sounds extremely utopian to me, and the way it's presented. So I guess you, from a more technical standpoint, I mean, would it actually be able to do this?
CRISPR could have a lot of failures along the way, and I'd love it to happen so that we kind of have more time to prepare the minds of humans to the idea that we should just not engage in it. But my fear is that no matter what the obstacles will be, there will be solutions to them. There may be unintentional genetic modifications, but eventually these unintentional genetic modifications will turn to our advantage. Because even if I don't know, 99% of the people on the first batch of humans affected by this technology, 99% could die. But what about the 1% left? They will have evolved basically a resistance to whatever defects the original technology had. And so they will have been selected through random events to have better genes to handle the interaction with CRISPR. So whatever are the offsets and the obstacles, I'm afraid that we have to take a conscious decision, and that it's the only solution, because all of these obstacles will be surmounted at some point. Now, you were mentioning AI singularity, and I find that the discussion in this domain is such low level. I don't believe, one moment. I don't believe that the people engaging around intelligence properly understands it. They talk about intelligence being the threat to humanity, when in fact intelligence isn't a threat. Intelligence is a tool, and it's a tool as much for computers as it is for ourselves. It's a tool that can pay off sometimes, and sometimes it may not pay off. In our current society, intelligence is not necessary to survive. And that's why people of high levels of intelligence, like 140 IQ, are extremely rare. It's simply because there is no evolutionary pressure to drive the population to be generally intelligent. The same will apply to AI. No matter what level of intelligence we're talking about, this intelligence will be a tool. It may be used by some people, it may not be used by others, and they will be rewarded or not rewarded for their use of it. There is one danger with artificial intelligence beyond the problem of phenotypic revolutions. It's the problem that it replaces our intelligence. It makes our intelligence obsolete and useless. And as such, it creates an evolutionary pressure that may make us even more stupid. So we have to be conscious of this. But to me, general artificial intelligence is not a civilizational threat. At worst, it will be something that will be used by certain humans to dominate over others. But that's always been the case. It's still human to human competition when an AI just helps one side rather than another. The phenotypic revolution is radically different, and I'm so sad when I see these discussions, but they don't mention this alternative scenario that the phenotypic revolution is, because in that scenario, we have a true civilizational threat. We have something that will abolish everything that we are, no matter who we are and where we are on planet Earth.
Yeah, it is interesting to me that I think one of them, the bigger pushbacks against these types of technologies, embryo selection, comes in a way from a faction of the left because it's considered eugenics. I mean, do you think the wider eugenics debate would have some importance here? I mean, it is something that's important to the left. The left is in power. Is it something that might put a damper on this type of technology, or do you think it's negligible?
I believe that the current left takes issue with eugenics. My big fear is that once the technology is extremely available and at low cost enough for it to be done on everyone, that there will be a reversal of the left's position on this and of the normie and normocentric position on genetic modification. In fact, I believe that once CRISPR is established as a solid mean to improve people, the left will see it as an occasion to create an equalitarian utopia that that will basically be a leftist one, that will rove around the themes of leftism, such as authoritarianism, faith to a central entity, and public education as the kind of foundations to this new sort of eugenics. My fear is that they take issue with eugenics up to now because eugenics is associated with meritocracy and absence of fairness. That is the eugenics we've known for centuries. But the eugenics of the future are going to make their way into society by arguing that we can fix the unjust system of meritocracy and that we don't need a meritocracy anymore. In fact, we can make everyone just perfect. That is the fear, because the leftists are so numerous that they will, and the normies, they will determine what way humanity is headed. And if they are tempted by this argument, in the same way, I would argue that corporations have been tempted through wokeness in the last decade. And that's a bizarre bed partner to have capitalism in bed with wokeness. But the same thing could happen between eugenics and wokeness once eugenics is demonstrated to be a tool to achieve equality rather than create more of it.
Yes, I think people would wise up on HBD very quickly if CRISPR was available to everyone. Yeah, it would become instantly common knowledge. No one would be hiding any more tables, any more Excel sheets. Yeah, it's instantly a big part of the left. We've always known this is true, but now we have the power to change it. I mean, there are quite a lot of technologies in this realm as well. I mean, you have genetic testing for disease. I don't know. Is that something you think is risky as well, or is that beneath the threshold of something you'd consider dangerous?
I think we can test. The problem is by testing, we're also creating a situation where we are more and more tempted. The more you test, the more you know, and the more you know, the more you want to intervene. So as long as we're extremely rational about it, we could know everything about the human genome and yet have a moral principle that says we're not going to touch it. We're going to leave it as such. The big problem is when these ethics committees start saying, "Oh well, we have evaluated the technology and there is uncertainty about it, but we may prove that it's safe in a couple of years." That's what I read from basically the philosophers and the bioethicists that think about these questions. They take no account at all of the long-term evolutionary consequences of their action. They're just interested at, is the baby going to breathe okay? And did we improve his life? That is such an individual framing. We have to get out of it. And we have to understand that once you let doctors play with the course of evolution, you mess up a process that we need to maintain ourselves as we are.
Yes, I think there's an argument that I heard about the fact that, we have extremely low child mortality now, which, has been a blessing to many parents. And, at an individual level, it's a miracle. But on the collective level, there are consequences for this, because these are essentially children who wouldn't necessarily have been viable. I mean, all of IVF is essentially brute force implementation of embryos that wouldn't have been viable, and just trying to create life where there shouldn't, but there naturally shouldn't be any. Obviously, a miracle on the individual level, but at the same time could have consequences down the line. I mean, do you think these technologies? I mean, these have been active for a very long time. Do you think this has an implication in the phenotypic revolution?
Well, they have evolutionary implications because they create more variability. They let people exist who wouldn't have existed. So we have to be conscious of this. And they may be ultimately creating staging the scene for the phenotypic revolution to happen, because eventually there will be so much variability and so much weakness in what we carry into the future that there's going to be people who are systematically in the need of a help from the doctor to survive, or a help from the doctor to reproduce. That's what IVF does. It increases the number of people in the population who will in the future need further IVF to make more babies. So what do we do with this? Well, we have to start managing society by caring for the evolutionary forces that we're messing with. And that is something that the left hates doing. But we have to be aware that it's not necessarily by saving someone directly that we're resolving the problem. We may have resolved the problem for that individual, but that individual will have babies. These babies will have the genes of the individual, of the initial person who was in problem and who needed whatever help, whether that's humanitarian help or medical help of some kind. And so we are creating, for every problem that we solve, we're creating a host of equivalent problems in the next generation. This has to stop. And if we don't stop this, we will create an even more ardent argument for the phenotypic revolution, where people will say, all right, we have created such dependent populations on this planet that we need genetic editing to fix them up. And this will make the problem worse. The solution is a kind of view, a anarcho-primitivist view of society, where we accept that we are a life form, and that the responsibility that comes with a life form is to care that evolution will always happen onto us, and try to direct it in a decent direction rather than direct it in a direction of dependence and lack of self-sustainability. But the leftists are clearly not ready to engage on this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the perspective you lay out there is deeply responsible, but I feel like at a level of abstraction that people can't grasp. I mean, this seems completely foreign of a way of thinking for obviously pretty much everyone on the left, and I would say 90% of people on the so-called right as well, because the individual perspective, the survival of one individual. This is kind of the core of pretty much modern theology is how it is. The preferences of the individual, the survival. COVID. If COVID taught us one thing, it is that this most sacred core thing is this abstraction of the survival of every individual. There's bare life. It needs to survive.
The death count.
Exactly, the death
It's
count.
amazing how people talk in harm, death count, saving suffering, but they don't think about, if you save suffering now, how much suffering have you caused in 50 years from now, when the next generation shows up? But I would like them to think in that way. Of course, we don't evolve to think in that way. That's a very mathematical and academic approach. But I think that we should see it like engineers. Engineers have not evolved to be engineers. They think of problems in terms of the structure, the causes, the mechanism, and they reach a conclusion. We need engineers of evolution. rather than blind ourselves and go with these blindfolds that cut us from reality, we need to understand that evolution will happen whether you like it or not. And it's much better to care about it than to ignore it.
Yeah. I mean, you have this view, this vision of evolution as a driving force, and it's something that we shouldn't unshackle ourselves. It is an abstract view. It's kind of an engineering view, and it's I think a hard one to communicate to people. Most people don't see, submitting to evolution as one of the core things. But I feel like the problem is that they don't see any other meta narrative that ties them to the next generation as a core thing of their life anymore. What they see is the food, the whatever it is that is interesting in the moment, and all influences around them tell them that this is the most interesting thing. Whatever status game they're involved in, living for the day is very important. Having the experience is very important. What's going to happen with your children? I mean, who even wants children anymore? They're exhausting. Why would one want children? You can do something else more interesting with your experience of the world. So I think that's, to me, it feels like that's a very complicated. It's very hard to convince people to care about their offspring when it's not. It's optional. It's just another accessory
Yeah.
that you buy.
And I'm asking them to care about their great, great, great grand offspring. So it's a tough thing, but I wouldn't say it's impossible simply because if you look at traditional thinking, just at my grandfather and my great grandfather, they had all of these ways of doing and these perceptions that they were continuing the world through their family. And so there is something of an instinct in humanity that's ready to welcome that idea. Somehow this idea has been put to the side through modernity, and some of it may be subversive, a subversive manipulation of society. I love this word, by the way. I love your podcast title. I
Thank
really
you.
think subversive is both what we are the victim of many times in anti-natalism and all of the attacks on the family, but it's also what we have to learn to do. We have to learn to be subversive to counter the subversiveness of the other side. But yeah, I think there's something natural in humanity capable of digesting a view that is intergenerational and a view of yourself as I'm just a part of a chain of being. And my grandfather may have thought himself of a chain of maybe 3, 4 generations that he could think of. But now that we have biology, we have a much more deep view that we are actually part of a chain of sex that has been going on for at least 500 million years, if not a couple billion years.
Yes, I think it's a hard thing to communicate to people. Yeah, I mean it feels like the biggest burden of our generation to bring back that. But I feel like, obviously I know communities that are coming back from that. They've been soaked in liquid modernity and they want it out, and now they're having children and they're committed to their families and all of that. So there is kind of a backlash effect. And there is importance in ideology. I mean, people say, ideology is just a cloak for power, and it's used by powerful people to. It also can change lives. I feel like a lot of people, start off LARPing. They watch whatever content, but if it ends up making changes in their lives where they just decide to, procreate, it's all good. This is very useful ideology. So yeah, I mean, how do you see that? Do you see any sort of changes on the horizon in terms of how people view themselves, or this has to be something that's done from on high, and it needs kind of forceful intervention, or whatever the Amish are doing, it won't matter in whatever 200 years?
Oh no, I think that the Amish are a great model of society, and I think we should inspire ourselves. I would like to. I like to think of myself as a Amish with a computer and a fiber optics cable connecting me to the internet. I think that they provide a model of society that we should definitely inspire ourselves from. Now, do I think that it has to come from the top down simply because our ancestors basically had top down people instructing them to reproduce, basically religion and the dominant ideologies of the time? But I don't think it has to come from top down. I think it's inevitable in the face of the game that we're playing, which is evolution, that the game is set for people who are natalists, people who care about making babies. They will survive and they will outcompete the others. It may seem dark when you pass through modernity and we live in the times that we live, because you see all of these anti-natalist memes succeeding, but they can only succeed temporarily. That's a truth of evolution. Whoever keeps making babies under the constant bashing of anti-natalist modernity will have developed an evolutionary resistance to any of these bad ideas and will, by definition, define what the next generation looks like. The next generations that are coming can only be more natalist in face of the same stimuli. It is only because modernity came so fast that it surprised our genes in a way. And we have to live through the nightmare of seeing so many people fall for antinatalism. But in the end, the game is set for us to systematically win.
Yes, but the only major opponent is the phenotypic revolution, which can catch up to
Yes,
everyone.
except the phenotypic revolution, because the phenotypic revolution is an alternative life form that doesn't tell you don't make babies. It just outcompete your babies. So that is the threat we have to think about. I'm not super worried about the threat of antinatalism as a contagious meme telling us not to reproduce, because that will be resolved by any ongoing evolutionary process that still goes on.
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, like you said, it is a bit disheartening to see how many absolutely normal people fall for these memes. It's just a big part of my black pilling and career on the internet is just talking to many of my childhood friends and people like that who's just hook, line, and sinker went for everything that came in, and it's just very very stereotypical how it ended up. And it's sad, and you can't really confront ladies directly about this stuff. So I talked to strangers on the internet about it, and maybe one day they'll hear this podcast and know that I'm judging
Why
them.
can't you confront ladies? Is it harder to speak to ladies than men on this subject?
I think so. I mean, maybe I'm not good at it. But also, obviously, the caveat is maybe my social skills are a little bit lacking or something, or I don't know how to put it nicely. But I do tend to either be very blunt or not say anything. And I guess in the moments when I'm very blunt, 6 months of silence ensues, and then I realize that I made a mistake. So yeah, it's but this stuff is like extremely important. It is, and it's the stuff of religious conviction almost. It's kind of like confronting my Protestant friend if I was, a Catholic in whatever Ireland in the 1930s or something. We're gonna have a lot of friction because there's also a lot of cognitive dissonance with these decisions. Like, for example, if you're like woman in your 30s and you've decided not to have children, that decision comes with a lot of thinking. You've been thinking about this, you've debated this internally with yourself and others. And there's a lot of good arguments to have children. And for you to continue convincing yourself that this was the right decision, you just consume all the media that you can about it, and which tells you obviously that you've made the right decision. But then you also don't want to confront yourself with any arguments to the contrary. So you're very irritable about talking about it. So yeah,
I don't
sad
even
fact.
like the concept of arguments. I don't think that the decision to reproduce for a life form should be channeled through the cognitive layers of the brain. I don't think that nature intended us to think about having babies. Nature made everything so that we would have babies if we just needed some warmth one night and we hugged to someone else and eventually the rest would go. It should be as easy as this, but modernity has put so much obstacles in the way. It's what I call the modern big cock blocking. The condoms, the birth pill, everything.
But it's like you were saying that we found out about genes. I mean, maybe the bigger crossroad was when we found out about sex and how babies are made. That was very important. Like we shouldn't have known. Just continue doing what you're doing and don't worry about it.
That's an interesting thought. Maybe the day we realized this, I don't know. Maybe it was couple of thousands of years ago, I guess. I mean, you can see religious texts in which they don't understand fully that there's a sperm and an egg, but they kind of know that the sperm has something to do with it. But yeah, maybe that day was the wrong one.
Yeah, there's a lot of forks in the road, but that's one of it. Um, yeah, I also want to ask you about synthetic wombs. I mean, this is also a big question on the right. A lot of people are pro, especially people who are worried about the extinction of certain races, are very much pro synthetic wombs, just because okay, maybe this is a plug and play solution for our issue, and then we can just respawn from a warehouse outside Seattle or something like that. So I don't know. Is this even close to reality? I mean, you see all these rendered photos of synthetic wombs in one big warehouse, and it looks all interesting on like a little internet video. But I don't know. Is this anywhere close to possible?
It's relatively close. We've done it with animals, and so there will be lots of obstacles along the way to make it really safe and really desirable, and no handicap resulting from it. But I think we could get there within the next 50 years, realistically. Or we may not, and it may take a little more time if we're shy on the ethics side and on the questions relating to should we do it. But I mean, I advocate for a resistance to technologies, but not all of them and not indiscriminately. I think that there's fascinating things like the internet. I have no issue with it. Lots of the medicine, lots of the drugs, I take no issue with it. There is a problem of overdiagnosis in our society, and we're giving them out too much. But in general, I think we should develop anything that fixes an ailment or a disorder. And I think that ultimately the liberty of people should be what determines if they take it or not. And it doesn't mean that everything will be good about these technologies, but at least as long as we're in a world where people are free to take them and they get the good effects if they're good, and they also go through the bad effects if they're bad, I'm fine, because the punishment and the reward system is well aligned. The person who made the decision ends up paying the price or benefiting from it. Now, the question of artificial uteruses, basically artificial wombs, is interesting. I think we should be extremely cautious with this technology because it undermines the monogamous marriage, nuclear family style of living. It allows a lot of reproduction that may go on in ways that haven't been traditionally established as working. So, what happens when five people decide to get a baby together in an artificial womb? That might become possible. Is it good for a child to have five parents? Is it good for a child to have parents who identify as A, B, C, and who normally wouldn't have had babies, but somehow through this technology can have them? We have to think about all these things. Now, jokingly, and I would say half jokingly, there is still one thing that redeems the artificial womb, and I bring it up sometimes. It is that it will be a leverage, because currently what is the limiting factor in human reproduction is the female womb and the female desires. And this has come to frustrate a lot of men who gather in the incel community and who basically think every day about how frustrating it is not to be chosen. And there may be men of value evolutionarily that are getting rejected by women for the wrong reasons. And you would think that the artificial womb can leave an out for these men and can also give a leverage so that women cannot have this superpower, which is to choose the entirety of the future direction of humanity. Perhaps it is good that they have it. Perhaps it is bad sometimes. And perhaps it would be good for a man who is successful in many ways. For example, he may be a billionaire, but somehow he has social issues that lead him to not seem desirable to women. Perhaps the artificial womb would be a solution to remove a little bit of power to women and say, there's this option, and you can have, in fact, 10,000 babies because you're a billionaire, so you can buy a lot of artificial wombs. Will it be desirable for the babies? I don't know. There will be lots of questions and lots of things to resist also against. But in the current context where you have a big issue in society with female-initiated divorce, an issue that leads to actual human suffering because of the legal system of family courts that deny parental rights to fathers. Having the artificial embryo solution to say, hey, if you cannot give us some kind of loyalty, if you cannot guarantee us some kind of stability through marriage, if you're telling me that the nuclear family is destroyed no matter what I do, then the artificial womb solution seems like an interesting one, because the nuclear family being already destroyed by female decision making, then we get an out that doesn't include a female.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people make this argument. It strikes me as quite dystopian. I feel like it's very much, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, even literally in this case, seems a little bit extreme. I know a lot of people who, as far as I understand, have been actually, hurt in the courts, end up making this argument, and people who have a life story that matches exactly what you said. This is there's unfairness. There's a lot of corruption in terms of the legal system and all of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, as a woman myself, as a mother, as happily married, I would say maybe hold off. There are ways
I always
to
get
fix
this. I get this opposition from quality females like you who are loyal and who don't have to face the landscape of female aggression in our current society. I think that I don't know if you, as a clearly beautiful and intelligent female who's loyal and who's happily married, I don't think if you measure fully the state of the female pool of breeding in current society, it is horrible.
I haven't measured it myself.
Worse than war.
I'm sympathetic to this view. I mean, like I said, I know this, and the group of people that I grew up in is these are not bad people, but they've been convinced that, okay, this is individual fulfillment is what they should be chasing. Their lifetime is the only ticket they have to maximize enjoyment and experiences and travel and whatever that is. Children are a burden because they are. It's really hard to have children compared to modern living, where the food comes delivered by some dude and you have a email job and stuff like that. Not sleeping for 6 months it's like trench warfare conditions compared to your day life. So I mean, I understand, but at the same time, I think they're misguided. But at the same time, I also know that these are absolutely normal, decent women who, if there was a change in the water, if there was a change in what is high status, what is interesting, and maybe a change that, as always in history, was prompted by a handful of important, power-hungry men that these women end up looking up to, things could change quite suddenly. A preference cascade could go in the other direction without people having to grow children in their shed. Okay, so we don't need to do that.
I was just about to say, yes, exactly. That's what we need. We need power over these women, and we will achieve this power by using the artificial womb and showing them, hey, no. We can include you back into the reproductive cycle, but you're going to have to be kind and smiling and loving. That's all I want.
I mean, yeah. I could imagine that, some women might think, okay, they're going to start tacking on more and more conditions to this list. I don't know if I want to participate, especially because a lot of, the problem is that a lot of women and a lot of men as well. I mean, I know there are, a lot of decent men who want children who can't have them as well. There are also a lot of decent women who can't have children for many reasons. And they would maybe, go the artificial womb route. But the issue here is that a lot of women just decide that it's not worth it. Like a lot of the lacking in, life is comfortable for a lot of women. It really is. It's not that bad being, a girl boss spinster. We people talk, it's like the end of the world. There's a lot of depression and anxiety. There's medication for that. It's not as bad as being like, I don't know, a diseased crone in some, medieval village, maybe, who's, a spinster like 600 years ago. Life is better. You get your foot massages, you have your email job, you go to whatever, Costa Rica once every 2 years. Starbucks, it's pumpkin spice time. There's a lot of distractions. It's really not bad. So even if, men show up with their artificial wombs and a list of, demands, they'll be like, yeah, whatever, man. My decision to be a feminist is correct. So I think we need to negotiate a truce that's not just throwing out an ultimatum. So that's why I'm not for the artificial wombs. I think it would destroy already tenuous gender relations.
For this negotiation to even happen, we need something to dangle in front of women that they want. And men have been deprived of the thing that they used to dangle. That thing was security and stability and property. Men have been deprived of it because, we have headed toward a social welfare society, and where, all right, marrying a billionaire is still very interesting, but marrying a 60K person or a 100K person will not lead to much improvement in your life, because anyway, the state will care for you if you don't marry anyone. And that is a big problem. Of course, it's a radical solution, but the artificial womb gives that dangling power to say, all right, you don't want to reproduce, you go away, and you will not leave your genes in the future generation. And we're going to keep reproducing with artificial wombs until some woman pops out that desires the family lifestyle. And then we're going to give up the artificial womb.
There's quite a few of those, but it's not the same amount of women as it was maybe in the 1950s or something like that.
Yes, and so with that dangling power, we would have at least equal dangling power, because currently we're getting dangled a lot, man.
We are being you're told, the danglies and we're the danglers.
You have to look at me in the eyes. You don't take good care of me. You don't pay flowers. You don't do this, and we have nothing to dangle anymore.
Yeah, I mean, getting flowers for your wife is nice. I would say, if you can dangle some flowers occasionally, that's quite nice. We appreciate it. Just in case my husband listens to this, I don't think he will. Yeah, I mean, all fair. Like I said, I hope that the dangling will not commence anytime soon.
You were mentioning your husband not watching the show. How do you relate your ideological dissidence to your family? Is he aware of what you think? Does he like your interviews?
I think he's watched a few. He's a conservative. He's not as neck deep in the minutia of whatever differing factions and stuff. I mean, this always interested me. Yeah, I mean, we agree on most things. He's just not as he kind of vaguely knows the direction that I'm in, but and he knows that pretty much everyone on the show would be considered far right, and that's okay. That's like a good summary. But he doesn't think that that's like something reprehensible or that I'm insane or something like that. So It's all good. I also don't think I would fare very well with someone that was like me or interested in exactly the same things. I think we just devolve into like the narcissism of small differences over whatever little factional bullshit that happens, because that's essentially what happens on the right every day. Every day there's beef between this, the family guys and the pagans and the vitalism, and should you have a six pack, or is it okay to relax, or it's all sorts of things like that. Constant battles. So thank you, no thank you. I don't want that in my house.
Oh yeah, people lack an appreciation for difference in the couple. In the dating scene, you have, I want a man who likes snowboard like me. It's like, what does it change really? And is it really a necessary thing for your family to do exactly the same and have exactly the same hobbies? I find this totally ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, people have insane standards for what a good relationship should be in
Yeah.
general. I think, dating's destroyed people. The idea, just even for like, even you don't have to be like some extreme outlier, the guy who can date 1,000 women, to be tired of the whole process and also jaded by it. And even if you're like, a relatively average guy who's dated a few women, it's, you go through the motions, and you also kind of get to a point where you kind of want some aspects of that person, but also mixed in with some aspects of that person. Nobody's perfect. So you just kind of wait, bide your time to, yeah, maybe this, maybe that. Women, the same. So yeah, I don't think it's a good development. I think people should make their peace with the problems that the other person has. I think that, and you're always going to have to make your peace with that. It's not really, it's the biggest cliche in the world, but nobody's perfect. And people just don't realize that really nobody's perfect. Neither are you. So it's important to internalize that and live it in your day-to-day life. Makes people much happier.
Yeah, I think that current society focuses the decision making of people in a couple on, do I want to stay with him? And that's as opposed to being alone. And that's as opposed to choosing in the next guy. I think that you should focus when you think about these questions on, is there really a chance that the next guy will be better, much better? And most of the time it's no. Most of the time you're getting older and you're going to have more difficulty dating, and you're going to end up with worse.
Yeah, but there's just kind of this weird promise, I think, also from media. It's a lot of romance movies and essentially porn for women. That there's this type of person who's is dominant but also sensitive. Is also looks like a god, and there's that kind of that promise somewhere that maybe if I cross paths with this guy and he sees me reading this book that he also loves, because that's how this type of stuff happens. Maybe it'll happen. So yeah, there's always that promise there. But yeah, unfortunately, for most people, 99.9% of people, that day is never going to happen. The meet cute at the coffee shop over Catcher in the Rye or whatever normie book you're
Yeah.
reading is not going to happen. Yeah, it's sad, but yeah, I mean, men have porn. I know, I'm sure that feeds all sorts of delusions as well.
Absolutely.
I know we're slowly coming up on time here. I want to ask you the last question. It's a question that everyone gets on the show: is if you have a recommended thinker, someone who's been influential maybe for you, could be a writer, could be a biologist, could be anyone you think is maybe a little bit underrated and people might do well to check out.
I don't think he's underrated, but to me, the most foundational reading was always The Selfish Gene of Richard Dawkins and The Extended Phenotype of Richard Dawkins. But there are books that are underrated on a front, which is the political front. Unfortunately, Richard Dawkins wrote these books being a liberal and trying to push liberalism the strongest he could in front of the facts. But I don't think he did it well. So what I would recommend is not so much to read it because it's underrated, but read these books with a different mind. Reject all of the comments about liberalism, about Richard Dawkins saying, I don't want human society to be an evolutionary entity. I don't want people to be selfish. And read these books with the understanding that no matter what Richard Dawkins wants, this has to be the truth about humanity. It has to be the truth that society is filled with parasitic forces that try to exploit each other, that will try to drain energy from you, that will try to consume from you, and that evolution makes this a fatality, that there is no way you can be alive and not be subjected to all these forces that try to fight against your existence. So read it that way, and I think that even if you've read it previously, you may have a different outlook, and a different outlook also on what this means for society, what this means for your political thinking. Because I think we have to read The Selfish Gene and understand this is what happens to humanity right now, and there's no way out, and we have to accept it and live well with it and try to veer it toward a favorable direction that we can agree on, but not try to combat it the way Richard Dawkins did.
Yes, it's interesting because I have that book on my bookshelf. It's a kind of artifact from a different era when I was very much into new atheism. So I obviously bought the extended Richard Dawkins catalog, and I was
Okay.
kind of tangentially interested in it because it was a bit too technical. I just wanted the takedown of religion. I was like, how many pages in does he start attacking religion? It's pretty long winded for me at the time. So I might revisit it now that you mention it. But yeah, that is a really good point. I think there are quite a lot of people in science who do an excellent job before they add their layer of preferred ideology, which is invisible to them because they think it's common sense. People like Steven Pinker. I mean, one of the best books I've ever read, and one of so-called red pill books of mine, was the Blank Slate. A lot of people have read that book.
Absolutely.
Excellent book. Essentially, your gateway into HBD. If anyone's curious about this, there's quite a lot of it in there. Sex differences. Anything you want. Yeah, it's But Steven Pinker obviously is a man who's very liberal, and he's yeah, quite famously so. But also, yeah, a good recommendation. So
the contrast between the sharpness of these people and how they think when it's hard science, and then the blind spots that they have with their boomer inspired ideologies, it's just stunning. I think there's a saying in English about heroes systematically falling, or you live long enough to become the villain, or something like this. I think that they have lived long enough to show themselves a weaker version of themselves that you don't get when you pay attention just to their science. It's so swift, so sharp, and then eventually you get their political commentary, and they haven't even integrated their own theories and their own intelligence and applied it to their political thinking. In fact,
yeah.
that's what I'm trying to do different. A lot of my public career is basically my frustration with Richard Dawkins being so right on evolution and so wrong on everything else, that I wanted to fix a little bit what he had done. And my book also fixes part of his theory at the biology level, particularly with respect to memes. I think that they're a deceptive concept, and I hash it out in the book in chapter 9. But yeah, we need people who are not only capable of understanding the full theory of evolution, but tell people what it means for what we can't escape as a society.
Excellent. So the third recommendation here is Jean-Francois's book, the Revolutionary Phenotype, out everywhere. It's also on Audible, which is always a good thing if you're doing stuff around the house. Is there anything else that people should check out?
You can check out my Twitter account at JFGARIEPY. I've been recently unbanned on Twitter after a year of banning. I feel like I'm a prisoner out of a dungeon, reawakening to what society has become while I was gone. I enjoy it, and I highly appreciate this move by Elon. It gives me hope that the public space will be restored with free speech.
Yeah, I hope so too. And also check out JFG Tonight, which you can see in the background there as well. Yeah, thank you so much, Jean-Francois. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.